Hello and welcome to lesson number 10, where we'll talk about selectors. Now, selectors are great. They give you access to the DOM and allow you to manipulate it even. And these selectors are tied really well into the document and window objects. And if you remember from the objects lesson, an object is a collection of properties, basically, properties and methods. And by using these properties and methods, you can gain access to various elements in your DOM and do various things with it. Now, in this lesson, I'm going to show you some of the more popular or well-known selectors that you'll find yourself using as a web designer. So the first thing, let's actually show you the page I have here. It's a simple demo page. We have some unordered lists, a bunch of IDs on both of these. We have 4 images, all with a class of myImg, and each one with its different ID, and then a couple of paragraphs. Now, let's start with this. I'm going to do a console log for document.body. And let me actually open the inspector here. Right, and this gives me body. Now, body is an object, and you can see all of its properties. You can get a lot of information about this. For example, client height, client width, the inner text, the inner HTML. Down here we have events. We'll learn about those in the next lesson. But basically, this is a very simple way to access these properties. Or document images, for example. Document images is going to give you this HTML collection, right? So we have your images here, and you can learn various properties for them, like the base URI. You can learn the alt, the class name, width, height, the SRC, and so on. So by having access to these, you can actually start using selectors and manipulate them, do various things with them. So let's see a couple of examples. Let's say, for example, that I want to grab the very first item, which is this item 1. How exactly would you do this? Well, we're going to go right here, and I'm going to say this. Var first item equals, we're going to get the document object, and we're going to use the following method: get element by ID, and in here we're going to put the ID of item-1, because that's what we have in the DOM, as you can see here, ID item-1. Right, so if we do a console log for this first item, it's going to give us the item itself. Right, so that's the first method that I want you to remember: get element by ID. It returns the first element that it finds in the DOM with that particular ID. Now, this will just return one element, because if you want your HTML to be valid, IDs are unique. So you cannot have 2 elements with the same ID. So that's why this method, this function, basically returns a single element. Okay, now let's say that you want to get access to these 2 ULs. Right? So they both have the class of myList. Well, to get elements with the same class, you would do document get elements, plural, by class name. And we're going to say myList. Yeah, so now myList gives me these 2 unordered lists. What about getting elements by their tag name, which means get all the images, all the paragraphs? Well, that's also easy to do. You can say, for example, paragraph equals document, get elements by tag name, p, paragraph. And that's going to select these 3 paragraphs here. Now, if you've used jQuery, you remember how you would do selectors there. You would do something very close to CSS selectors, right? Well, you have something similar in vanilla JavaScript, and that's with a method called query selector all. So for example, let's say that I want to select all the images. Well, I can just say images equals document dot query selector all, and I would pass in a CSS selector. In my case, it's img, and that will select all the images. Okay, so now you have all of these variables which reference objects in your or elements in your page. How do you manipulate them? Well, first of all, you can start with the CSS properties by using the style property. So you would say something like, for example, first item, you would say style dot and then color, and you would change that to something else, for example, red. So now the first item is red. Then what if you want to hide this second list? Well, let's think about it. My list is actually an array. That's what getElementsByClassName returns. So it's an array. You're going to access it like this, my list. You're going to pass in an index. I'm going to say 1 because we have 2 items, and it's a 0-based index, so we have 0 and 1. So my list 1 style display equals none, and that will essentially hide my second list. Then let's say that I want to change the color of all of my paragraphs to green. Well, you can actually use, you can do it by hand, or you can use a loop. So for example, we're going to say for var I equals 0, I smaller than paragraphs dot length. Paragraphs dot length works here because paragraphs is an array. I plus plus. We're going to say paragraphs I style color green. So now all of these paragraphs are green, and that's how you can manipulate the DOM using selectors and a loop. Now the list here can go on and on, but these are the basics. This is what most people use. This is what you'll mostly be using to access elements in your DOM. And we're gonna leave it at this. You're gonna see more complex examples when we get to the demos at the end of this course. Now, JavaScript also allows us to work with events, and that's what we'll be learning in the next lesson. See you there.